Welcome to the first podcast of the Westford Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I'm Joe Diamond, the co-chair, along with Anjali Reppucci of the DEI Committee in Westford. And we're thrilled to be able to have this podcast. This is the first in a series of what we hope will be a long-running podcast. Today's topic, or today's title, is Meet Your DEI Committee. And our hope is to be able to bring to you over time information about all the members of the committee, but today we have two members of the committee joining us. Pat Reppucci, to my left, and to my right, Joanne Derr. As I say, this is the first in a series, and we'll probably alternate with having Meet Your DEI Committee every other month, and in between we'll bring different guests from around town to join us. Probably the next time we're together will be Magali Ronan, who is the Curriculum and Equity Director in Westford. So today, for today's session, we're going to try to have a three-way conversation with all of us, and through the course of that conversation, we will learn not only about the committee, but about our own motivations and vision for Westford when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me just start with a little more of introductory information, and then we can get going with our conversation. For those who've not heard some other podcasts that we've been on, it might be good just for me to read out part of the charge of the committee. The committee was created by the school board and the select board to address and in response to local, state, and national incidents of racial violence, of intolerance, and of racism. Local activities were some very disturbing anti-Semitism, and so those two boards created the DEI Committee following on what other towns have done, and this was about 2.5 years ago in the fall of 2020. The charge of the committee is to identify needs around fostering acceptance, valuing diversity, and discouraging prejudice and discrimination against any person, group, or any other status protected by law on account of race, creed, color, income, religion, national origin, ancestry, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, age, or disability. The committee will review town and school policies and procedures and make recommendations to ensure that they advance equity and diversity within the committee, or where the committee has identified deficiencies. This, along with the experience that we've had, have helped us bring us to a point where we have some strategic directions. One is to celebrate the diversity of Westford. The other is to integrate DEI across town boards and committees. And as we have more experience together, where we plan to go is to develop together a mission and a vision, a mission for the committee and a vision for Westford. Just a few sentences about my background and the fact that I've been in Westford for 30 years with my family. Westford is a welcoming community, and so my inspiration was to be part of a group that would build on the fact that Westford fosters belonging. But we can always do better, I think, in terms of DEI in communities. Also, I was inspired to do this because of the experience we had in Westford as a Jewish family working with Joanne, actually, and many others, to create a temple which was welcomed by the community and by the town. And so the other aspect that brought me to this committee is that working for social justice is sort of part and parcel of my background as a human services professional. So that's why I'm here. And enough about me. Why don't we talk a little bit with our guests, and we'll have a three-way conversation.
Okay.
Pat, tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to the committee.
I was an immigrant child at 12. My parents were Irish immigrants to London. Way back when they were young, they met there. So based on discrimination against religion and ethnicity on my part, I learned early when you're not accepted. And so building upon that, we've actually lived in Westford. It'll be 49 years come December.
Wow.
And so I was always interested in social justice and, of course, racism, anti-Semitism, and that affects my family as well. So based on that and watching, new people come in, and I'm very interested in integrating in all aspects of inclusion, and I'll talk a bit more about some of my thoughts on that. So I raised my kids in Westford. They told me not long ago and before this was the best place they could have been raised. And it was safe. I'm the mother of a gay son, and when he said that, I thought, that's all right, that's good.
Nice.
And Westford has changed.
It's changed tremendously.
It's become very diverse, actually, over the years.
And
I don't think we had any stoplights when you moved to town.
No,
right?
there were none.
No
I could get to Jack Walsh Field in under 10 minutes from my house.
Right.
So, So, yes, I really, we're lucky that it has changed. Growing up in London, you are in all kinds of, I have a huge family there. We're everything. So, and that's what you got used to. So moving out here was a bit of culture shock because we lived in Cambridge before that. So that's my background.
Kind of like the country out here, right?
Yes. Well, my husband used to come up this way as a little boy and stay in the summer with family. So that's how he knew the area. That's how come we landed here.
What about you, Joanne? Tell us a little about your background and what brings you
Yeah,
to
so
the
I'm a
community.
kind of immigrant. I'm an immigrant from New York City. So
Indeed.
came from New York City to Boston and immediately had to become a Red Sox fan. Giving up my Mets dream of Mets ever winning a World Series. So I grew up in a very different environment than here as well. I am Jewish, as you said, Joe, and so we were in the religious majority in the area that we grew up in. But there were also a lot of black and brown people in the area that I grew up in. We had busing when I was in kindergarten. So I had done a lot of work. I'll tell you a little bit more when we talk about kind of professional background, if we can talk about that, sort of how I got into the work itself. But I came to Boston and found that it was very different, right? So I wasn't as much in the majority. It was very white, and I came in the time of busing. So here we are celebrating an anniversary, or remembering this anniversary of busing, and I didn't know what all the fuss was in the 1970s around busing because I had kids bused from kindergarten. So it was like living in another world, and I didn't understand it, and made it one of my missions to get into that kind of work, first in education, special education, and then human resources, and then executive coaching, and through a lot of other volunteering that I do. So, so that's kind of what brought me. And then I did the slow march out to the suburbs. And I was in Westford, and I didn't realize how predominantly white it was, I think, and Christian it was when I got here. So although I did find it was welcoming, and Joe and I, did start that temple and worked on it for many years and raised our kids here. There are many times when, the kids had homework on the Jewish holidays, or you go to the market basket and there's no Hanukkah candles and they offer you Shabbat candles instead. Or, even this past year, they ran out of matzah on Passover night 2. And it's like, sorry, we just don't have a call for it. It's like, well, I'm standing here and eating matzah, so what does that make me? Irrelevant? So, there are little pieces that don't feel good. And I'd love to be part of building a more inclusive, more respectful, more open, more aware environment. So maybe Market Basket says, I'm so sorry we ran out. How can we make it right for you? Rather than looking at me like, I'm an idiot, and how dare you ask me for something that we just don't have, It was a very bad feeling. That just happened this year, after being in this town for 30 years.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it has been 30 years.
Yeah, been there 30 years as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my husband's stepfather is Jewish, so we sort of blended there a bit.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
So, what, for both of you, or either of you, what would you say was the, if there was an initial inspiration to do this? Did the prospect of a DEI committee appeal to you because all of a sudden you said, yes, that's that's what I want to contribute to, or had you been thinking about it prior?
I've done other work. I worked for Cambridge Somerville Catholic Charities when my oldest son was born, and out of some of that did come some reasoning to seek DEI in action. But it actually sprang from something else. We have an Italian surname, so when my kids were little and we moved here on the street, we were referred to as the Italians, and not in the best way. And as time went along, my two younger children were constantly asked if their father was in the mafia. And so they got a bit fed up with that and then started saying yes, much to my horror, because they didn't tell me till about 15 years ago. But so they just handled it that way. I mean, it wasn't a major thing, but I thought that just didn't sit right. And then when The Godfather came out, I lost my mind. But anyway, to be honest with you, yeah, so there was some of that. And of course, Joe's stepfather rather, being Jewish, there was pieces of that from stories he told us. And so a lot of things came together. And I was the 7-year-old in London coming home from school that got a brick off the side of my head and called all kinds of names. Oh. So that really probably was the basis. And I said, with all of this stuff over your lifetime, you say, yeah, we've got to do something. And the final straw for me was when someone I was walking with whispered to me, we have a lot of foreigners in this town. And I said, yes, we do. You're looking at one of them. So total stop dead.
Nice.
And that put an end to that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the awareness part is so important. I think, and I actually, I do want to ask you, Joanne, that same question, but something that was interesting to me in my work with anti-poverty agencies, equity and opportunity are very important. We also think about some of the other considerations that can either separate people or bring them together. And when I first thought about this committee, in fact, when some friends of mine asked me, why are you interested? My first response was, because I want to explore what we share in common. But that wasn't the complete answer.
No.
And it took me a little while to get to the other part of the answer is, and to celebrate the diversity. We do have common humanity, but you also have to make sure that you pay attention to and celebrate the diversity. And there's so much in Westford that I think people might be surprised about.
Right.
Well, that requires looking at people first for like looking you in the eye and saying, who are you? Right. And not saying, well, you're different than me. You're Asian, you're Black, you're Latino, you're, I don't even know what you are, but you're different than me. And so, that's the work of the world right now, is that kind of integration and acceptance.
Absolutely.
And then I think the fact that we are different and we now have more diversity in the town is really fabulous, right? Because it makes us richer and more kind of juicy is the word that I use in diversity. So I want to know more about what was it like to grow up in London, or, being Indian, or being Pakistani, or, coming from China, or, right? And there's a lot of people from a lot of different countries here right now. It's very cool. And I'm very curious to know more about them. So having access to that, even the diversity committee, is, I think, a great opportunity for us individually and collectively.
Yeah. And my background was human resources business partner. So a lot of hiring and a lot of, high-level hiring. And so you learn a lot from just doing that. And as you said, getting to know people and not listening to people, I think, is a big piece of all of this. Listening. Yeah.
I agree.
And understanding why background is so important to certain people. We all cherish our backgrounds. We also cherish our children's futures, right? That's what makes us common. But there's also what's intriguing and what helps make a person is the background that we need to learn about, I think. I know you, Joanne. We've been friends for years.
Yeah.
But I also know that on a sort of a civic basis and a professional basis, you've worked on DEI.
Yeah, true.
So I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, so like Pat, I was in HR for many years. First, I was in special education, then vocational rehabilitation. So working with people with disabilities who, still very largely marginalized population, and trying to get them back into the workforce and seeing the barriers that they face in going back to work. And then from there, I was in corporate HR for many, many, many years, and I either was on the diversity committees leading initiatives or running them. And so I feel really fortunate about that. It was heart work for me. It wasn't the policy, procedure, employee relations. It was really where the heart of the organization was, and being able to bring in more people who are different and bring in just the variety of skills and talents was just super fun.
It is fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that piece
Yeah,
of it.
it's super fun. Yeah.
And I was fortunate. I was hired by a startup company. I was the 9th hire, the only woman on the board.
Nice.
So I had to write affirmative action plans, things like that.
Yeah.
So
Back in the day when we had affirmative action plans. Yeah,
Yeah.
true, yeah. So this has been work I've been doing for a long time in corporate, and then I'm in the Boston Club, which is an organization for executive women in the Boston area, and I'm the co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee there, the DEIC. And with Pat in town on the Westford Committee on Nonviolence, which we formed 12 years ago.
Is it that long?
Yeah, it was 12 years ago when there were 2 acts of horrific domestic violence in town, and Olivia Marchand was shot and killed, for example. So we're on that committee together, and then I also work to help to make those events a success, and I manage registration. So, victims of domestic violence also need to be seen and heard and protected.
Yeah.
There are crossovers, in terms of how people are treated when they can't speak up for themselves and they're not believed. So we could talk about identity. It's one of the things I'd love to sidebar as we go on. Just want to remember that I want to talk about identity.
Oh, absolutely. You mean here now, or as we go in the committee? Let's do that. It's interesting you mentioned identity. There are other words that we associate with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some committees are actually DEIB committees: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Yeah.
And you could add words too. Sometimes it's better just to keep it short and simple. But I'm particularly fond of the concept of belonging. There's a whole scholarship on that from California, Berkeley. But the way that I think about it is that we're embracing diversity, we're sort of pursuing equity, we're fostering inclusion. But all those things together, I think, provide for a strong sense of belonging, and I think it's the hope. I mentioned vision before, and part of it, and I haven't really formulated one, and I think we'll do that together, all of us, but part of my vision is where everybody in Westford has that sense of belonging, that they belong in Westford. And I don't know that that's the case. I would imagine not with everybody. But belonging, I think, is an important aspect of this, whether it's part of our name or not.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on identity.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. Identity is so important in this work and in our world, even in this podcast. The way we identified ourselves and the way that we introduced ourselves was around our identity. So I think to embrace, starting with the work of our newly reformed Committee 2.0. I don't know if you're calling it 2.0, but it kind of feels that way. And understanding how each of us identify.
Yep.
Right? As a Jewish person, as an former New Yorker, recovering New Yorker, as a mom, as a friend, as an HR professional, as a coach, right? Definitely as a female leader.
Yep.
Yeah, wear many hats. So I think really seeing people's identity and understanding what that means to them, sexual identity, you're talking about with your son, seeing those identities and understanding what it means to them is part of the fabric that gets woven together. And that makes people feel safe and seen and feels like they belong. All of those little moments where we're not seen for who we are, a piece of our identity is denied, are moments where we feel a tremendous lack of belonging.
Right.
And it couldn't just be that moment on the street you talked about, the moment at the supermarket I talked about, and it's just icky.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not meant to be a
Absolutely.
mean act, but
Absolutely.
it is, in some sense, intolerant, a lack of understanding. And so, I think that's an interesting concept. I think that's something that will, I think it'll be part of the conversation as we move toward a mission and a vision.
Right. I think, for me, I think of never belonging, never quite fitting in. You don't quite fit along the way in different areas. So.
Yeah.
And it's a big umbrella that we have.
Yeah.
Yep.
In Westford.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've known you for years and years also because we've been on that committee together.
Right.
And I've seen you just in moments where you absolutely shine and you're in yourself, and other moments where I can tell you just feel like you're not heard, you're not listened to, and you don't belong. And I can only see it because I'm such an extrovert that I just keep going, and everybody's talking over you.
I'm the introvert.
Right. Everybody's talking over Pat.
And somebody once said, "How on earth did you survive in HR?" They said you had to work incredibly hard. But I did, but I went home and then reverted to what I truly am. Yeah. And really an introvert is someone who needs to go back and regroup. So.
Recharge, But you're also a really good listener, and that was one of the qualities of this work.
Yeah,
the quality of HR and the quality of this work that's really important in diversity, equity, inclusion is really listening.
And then in revamping that handbook that I did in COVID for domestic abuse, had to rethink all the pronouns and, rethink quite a lot of things with each page you were going
to make
through.
that really inclusive. You're really tuned into that.
To be very inclusive, yeah.
There are so many diversities. I think even personality style is one of the diversities. And I think, and that was an education for me, not being open enough to the idea that there's so many diversities that we need to really be aware of.
Right, and on that note, I tend to leap ahead thinking that down the road, we need to be looking at disabilities. Seen and unseen, neurodiverse populations.
Absolutely.
I've got a whole long list. Sorry to add it to everything, but so when we broaden our scope a little, that becomes important. And you've got an aging population here in town.
So true.
And the stat I heard this morning was they're outgrowing the families with children. So there's a lot of conversations going on about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that has sort of economic implications as well. We're talking about the committee. You mentioned the committee. It's sort of, maybe for the want of a better term, it is a refreshed committee because we started out with a big group. It got a little smaller, and now we've got 9 or so new members. You and I are veterans.
Right.
Which is good.
Pat, you like to be in startups.
Yes.
That's right. Right. So now this is kind of a 2.0. Coming after the ballot question related to Indigenous Peoples Day, and we as a group came together on that. But I think it's true now. It's time to explore diversity in the community, to bring people together, and to think about how we can do that across the town boards and committees. And I'll just say, one thing about that. I used to be on the housing committee for a while, affordable housing committee for a while, and the very act of creating affordable housing or underwriting affordable housing, I think, is an act of DEI. And that group, I think, is aware of that.
Yes.
But I think that we should always be doing our very best to integrate DEI throughout the community and throughout the town. One other example, and then I'll quit on this, is the way that we do our very best to bring folks into, say, the school system as teachers or administrators that are diverse. I don't think we're ever going to match the diversity in Westford, because I think Westford is becoming diverse quickly. I don't know that we'll be able to match that, but I think we do our very best to bring in as much diversity as we can in our school system and across the town.
Right.
Well, I'm wondering, before we run out of time, I think you had posed questions to us ahead of time to think about, and I'm sure I know that Pat was thinking about them also, but the challenges we face and our vision for Westford
Indeed.
and the promise of the work. And is that something that we want to kind of close with talking about, the vision
Please
for the
do.
future?
I'm glad we got to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please, if you don't mind. Go right
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I was thinking about this a lot, and I think that I think there's a challenge in, as I said, it's the town is still predominantly thinks white, straight, Christian first. That's the default thinking, and I think if we can be part of shifting to, I don't know what, everybody, I don't know, who are you, right, first,
Right.
as opposed to that's the default, I think that could be a really positive step. That's kind of a vision piece I have. And I think that one of the challenges is having relatively few Black families and Latinx families in town. As I said, I think the diversity has grown in a lot of other ways, but I don't know that it's seen as a welcoming community for those folks. I don't know that we can get there.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So I see that as a challenge. And the other challenge, and you mentioned it, people are not poorly intentioned. People are generally good people, well-intentioned people. I love the people in this town, but we all have unconscious biases.
Right.
And part of the work is looking at our own unconscious biases. I see them every time I see something. I catch it every day. I'm catching my biases, but becoming aware that we have them and knowing that that's normal, I think is part of the work.
Well, there's raising awareness, there's helping people to embrace, but it's also can be a little bit uncomfortable. Don't you
It is
think?
uncomfortable.
Sometimes it is uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, I view some things as a teachable moment, in maybe saying, well, what do you think about this? And so I'm always using that term. And and I think you have to have patience and listen. And even when you don't like the answers.
Any other challenges you think that we face, Pat, that you've seen in your...
there's a bit of a divide, and it's based on people who've lived here a long time and don't like the changes
Interesting.
that are coming or on the horizon. And you can understand the unease of folks when things to them are changing rapidly. Then that's what I hear. So I volunteer at the senior center, so you get to hear lots of different views and different thoughts. And am I going to survive in my house as someone who's now low income because I'm a widower, whatever? There's huge challenges there.
A lot of fear with that.
And there's fear.
There is, this is part of the conversation I've had with the Housing Committee or Affordable Housing Committee, is there's a diversity, equity, inclusion component to income.
Yes.
And, Westford, through the committee, through the Housing Committee, is trying, I think, is getting better at it, bringing people to Westford so that we've got a little bit more of a diverse economic scale, if you will.
Yeah, good.
And that's really important too.
Yeah, to me that's huge. And at the strategic planning meeting, and I won't go into this because there's a lot to it, but the MBTA and housing, varied housing, different types of housing, so that you can get different economic status. And that's a long-term goal. I hope I get to see it, but that I'd be hugely invested in.
Nice.
So we should add that into our discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Not speaking for Anjali Reppucci, the co-chair, and was meant to be here but has a work commitment. I know that she and I are committed to helping the committee and the community to pursue these broad directions of celebrating diversity and working with integrating DEI throughout the town. But there are little steps along the way, and my hope is that having a multicultural Black Party, celebrating different national or ethnic events, and other things, bringing more education to the town, more information from experts and others, will be like drops in a bucket, and that over time we will, if you will, recognize together how diverse Westford is, and that celebrating that and embracing it becomes more natural to us
Yeah.
all. And
Right.
I think that's
And we
the-
are having the Westford celebration that's coming up. So, and we did that last year, so that was the start, and I can see that just growing. Mhm.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. And which-
So that sounds like that's part of your vision, Joe. When
Yeah.
your own answer to
Yeah.
your question about what is your vision for
I think that's
DEI in
part of it.
Westford.
And I really
Yeah.
look forward for all of us in the committee, and you both are better than I at sort of structuring these things, but that we would all share that in a structured way, but also through connecting to the community, and we'd figure that out too. I
Yeah,
think, how
yeah.
do we connect effectively to the
It can
community?
be part of your daily conversations. I was in a meeting this morning, and when certain things came up, I said, we have the DEI, the Disability Commission. We can play a part in changes, even if we're in the background, just giving our impressions of things. So please don't forget us. That's become part of my conversation in different meetings
Nice.
and things.
Great.
Especially the Disability Commission, because we lost our chair. We were out of work for 2 years, basically. So we're back up and ready to go.
This is our own Disability Commission in Westford.
In Westford.
Nice. Nice. Good to know.
So I don't want that segment
Yeah.
forgotten.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll keep bringing
Differently
it up.
able
Please.
people.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
after all, we're all temporarily able-bodied.
Right.
That is true. Yeah.
That's true.
As
That's very
we
true.
used to say in the business, and that's true. So we get older.
Yeah, you have no choice.
Well, we're at the magic 30-minute time.
I think so.
And time flies, when you're having fun. Any last thoughts? We've covered many of the questions, not all of them, but
Right.
I've so enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, I have also. I think it's so much about communication and
Yep.
open, honest communication. I mean, we're having a little bit of an intimate conversation here, and if we had a couple more hours, we'd go deeper and
We'd keep
deeper and
going,
deeper.
yeah.
Yeah, because we're open and willing to do that. And I think being an inclusive community requires that, and that real curiosity and openness and communication around who we all are, and bringing down the
Right.
walls that separate us and our neighbors, and
Right.
us and the rest of the community.
And that's our challenge, I think.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think curiosity is key. For those who are listening, please take a look at our website for information. Please engage with us as a committee or as individuals in the committee, and we promise to pay it back and engage with folks in the community too.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for leading us.
Yes, thank you.